Okay, so we're talking about incarnations. We're talking about Earth memories. We're talking about rewriting stories to amplify our roles in the collective ascension story that we have found ourselves within. Um, so, my earliest memories are within this lifetime, currently, and they're just kind of like little spots and blips of circumstances that kind of like a dream where you don't really know how you got there or what happened after, but you just kind of remember like that situation. And so I remember things like being on a telephone with an operator like as a 3-year-old or 4-year-old kid. Like I must have just been bored and picked up the phone and went 0 to see what happened. But I remember having multiple lengthy conversations with whoever was on the other end of the phone. And I don't remember my thought process at the time, but I do remember looking back on those things later and going, oh, I must have been pretty lonely or nobody was paying attention to me or something. But I remember the movie series Benji about the dog, if anyone remembers that. Uh I'm kind of going random for a second because my brain is gathering kind of bigger pieces from the bigger story, but let's say uh so I'm a big believer that like over the years as I've been conditioning myself away from linear thought patterns, linear beliefs about time, about space, about all of it. And so with that, I see incarnations falling along with that as well. Because if everything is a spectrum and we're here on a learning progression, then that what's to say that we don't choose to come back into the same incarnation sometimes, maybe not always, but in order to improve things or, move pieces along in a different way, like the space between lifetimes is a space of creation in the void between lives. And so really we get to do infinitely amount of options there depending on what the circumstances are and what the needs are. And so my theory, look like doing all of the shadow work and all of the kind of soul retrievals and like everything that I've done along my path at this point leads me to believe that there's a storyline of there's actually multiple storylines going on in my field and not just my genetic family but my soul family and how the pieces all tie together. It's like It's like I took a bunch of things that were at one point separated and through some common threads tied a bunch of stories together, and I'm kind of the thread that ties it all and carry those codes and frequencies to influence those different groups and patterns and paradigms so that we could cleanse it all. It's almost like It's like if we got this close to Ascension before, but there's like a handful of things that were like, oh man, if we could have just tweaked it just a little, just like this. And then we took all those together and we put them into one story. It's like I'm carrying that, is what I kind of feel like. And I don't mean that from a standpoint of ego. I just mean it from a standpoint of this is the collective story I see in front of me because it's otherwise it would not make sense to be tied together, but because I have those pieces and the experiential knowledge and the inner knowing that it makes a lot of sense to me. And so Let's see, where do we want to dive into this? It's as if it's as if I didn't exist like in this incarnation. There is a version of reality where I was not a thing. And it's like it's like I got a big team together and we all sat down at the puzzle board to figure out how we could create this incarnation that kind of helps to bop around and solve all of those seemingly very separate things by bringing it all like the pieces all together. And so my mom had a son that is 10 years older than me, but she, having come from a family that kind of left their children to their own devices, like to raise themselves. Like they provided the basic needs for their kids, like food, clothing, shelter, but the connection piece, the consciousness piece, the teaching, the wisdom, like those things were not passed down because her parents were dealing with their own stuff and whatever the case may be. And so I feel like when she got to that point of, oh, I have this kid now, like wasn't confident in her ability to raise a kid. And so she allowed, when her and her husband at the time got divorced, she allowed my brother's dad to have custody. And in the 70s, that was unheard of. And so she carried a lot of guilt and shame around that. And she never really like admitted why. Like there was one conversation that we had like way later in life that I was privy to that she was in her own way apologizing to my brother for giving him up as a baby. And so it's almost like I came along to um help her progress in her learning process. I won't say that she got there with me because and the reason why I say I feel that she felt that way is because I then picked up that generational pattern. And when I was a teenager, I ended up pregnant. And so, with this infant in my arms, I'm going, I don't have the skills. I don't know what I'm doing. I do not want her to be raised the way I was. I was lonely and I didn't feel like I had the support I needed. And I went through all this stuff in my head like, what do I do? And so I understand completely where my mom was coming from in that, prior situation of hers. And it played out really interestingly in our dynamics. Um, but it's things like that I call puzzle pieces. That's, oh, I can pick up this little nugget of wisdom from this story and this little nugget of wisdom from this story. And so um let's see, we were talking about religion and generational stuff within that. And so technically I'm a bastard child because my parents weren't married and I'm pretty sure I'm the product of a one night stand. I wasn't able to get either of my parents to confirm that for sure. My mom never talked about my dad. And my first memory I have of my dad is this is an interesting story actually because um so my mom was a single mom. Her and my dad didn't I don't even think they ever tried to have a relationship was the impression that I got. But so she was on her own, and so she relied on her parents to help take care of me when she was working because she had to have 2 or 3 jobs and, just to pay the bills and make ends meet. And over the years, she, went back to school. She went to technical school and to learn about computers, and like she had her own kind of career path that she followed, but she had to rely on people to help with me. And I'm really really grateful for that I had that because without that, I don't know where I would be without her parents, kind of and their influence, even if it was minimal in some ways, it still was a very much a guiding light for me on my path. And so I'm very grateful for that. Um, but Their neighborhood was such that their backyard connected with the house around the corner. Like they both had a garden in the back, and those 2 houses are the only houses on that block that were like that, and so I don't know why that's relevant to the story or important to bring up, but at some point, I think I was about 8 years old, and, there was a family living in that house that we shared a yard that, with a boy that was about my age. We were within 2 years, apart, and so one summer while I was, going over there to play at his house, apparently that's when I very first met my dad. But I don't have memory of the actual first time I met him. My first recollection of meeting my dad is in the front yard of my friend's house, and I look over and I see my dad talking to my mom. And then I asked my mom later, "Who's that guy?" And she's like, "Oh, we used to go to school together." Like, she made up some excuse so that I, wouldn't know the real story, and, that's okay. I mean, to a certain degree, that's age appropriate. I, it would have been nice later in life if she would have filled me in on on some of the details of that, but that's okay. So so I look over and see them talking, and that's really my first memory of my dad. Well, we were estranged my whole life pretty much. I didn't reach out to him to try to get to know him until I was about 30. And so the last several years has been um an interesting journey of us kind of learning about who each other is as people. And in that process, he told me a story about the first time we met, and that I was over at that house, and he had a story about who those people were and how he knew them. And I forget the details now. But he was telling me that the first time he met me, he made me breakfast. He said, "I made you an omelet." And I don't remember that. And apparently he put, he chopped up some little chives as garnish and put them on it, and I said, "Well, I don't really like onions. I'm sorry, I don't like onions." And so he made me another omelet without onions. And I don't remember any of this. I don't remember if there was conversation. Like, he must have been talking to me, like, and having a conversation with me, but I wish I remembered what was said in that conversation, because as I look back at the events of my life now, from that meeting point over the course of the next 12 months, like, so much in my life changed. That's when I received the Egyptian gifts that I mentioned earlier. I got like an old piece of papyrus with some scribing on it, and I got like a blue scarab. And this was just like, I don't even know where it came from. It was some, like, I think, I don't know if it was like a history museum or so. It came from somewhere. My mom gave them to me. But we also, my mom and I, because she was so busy working and trying to provide for us, we never really went anywhere. We didn't do vacations. We didn't really go out and do fun stuff. She was just always go, go, go. And so our one and only, like, family vacation in the summer was right after this whole situation with my dad, and we drove out to California and kind of up the coast, and then across Oregon, and then back down to Utah, which is where we lived at the time. And so we have this big vacation. I get to see all kinds of nature and stuff I probably wouldn't have otherwise seen until later in life. So we drove through the redwoods. We drove through San Francisco. I got to see the Golden Gate Bridge. We slept on the beach. We ate Denny's every day. Like, I had a great time just powwowing with me and my mom for 2 weeks while we took this road trip. Um, but I don't know, I didn't really think anything of it at the time, that it was random and like, we've never done this before, and so why are we doing it now? It was just like a cool adventure, but looking back at it now, it was like, no, that was the only time we ever did anything in the summer. And it was just happened to be right after I met my dad, so I think whatever happened between them at that time sent her on kind of a soul-searching journey in a way. Because after that, we started going to church, which we had never gone to church my whole life. My mom was not a big fan of church because she grew up, I don't think her parents were originally Mormon, or LDS as the Utahns call it, but they converted into the church when my mom and her siblings were, I don't know how old, but they were kids when they converted because my mom was baptized and that usually happens at age 8. And so she was baptized and she always told me the story about how she didn't really understand the Mormon church because she had questions that nobody could answer, and so she just kind of fell away from that. And then when I was growing up, we never went to church. I didn't even know what church was. I had no idea what church was until all of a sudden one day my mom's like, "Hey, put on this really pretty dress. We're gonna go do this new thing." And I was like, oh, "Okay, cool. That sounds fun." Until I realized it was like gonna interrupt my weekends every single week. And then I wasn't sure how to feel about it. But it gives me an interesting perspective because I wasn't kind of like for the first 8 years of my life, I wasn't brought up in any kind of religion. And so I don't have those like subconscious program like levels of programming about religion like as much as some other people do. Um, but there have been conversations about how my mom's side of the family it's somewhere is tied to Joseph Smith, which is the founder of the LDS religion. And, I don't remember if it was like how many greats in the grandparent like, great, 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 whatever, somebody's cousin was like Joseph Smith's whichever wife, I don't remember. And so I've always kind of was of the thought that I had family ties to the Mormon religion, but we're not Mormon because my mom had her own story about that. And so that's kinda how I grew up, and then, I found out later in life that my dad's side of the family also has a tie to Joseph Smith, and I think a closer one, in fact. And so that's a really interesting puzzle piece for me of, like, just the dynamics of religion, not religion, important people, historical figures tied in with certain things, and so it's just, like, part of the mystery that's kind of ever present in my field of, you know, what did what did I give myself to see? What am I meant to see here in this? Um, oh, what else do we want to say about that? It was about that time as well in my life, and I don't know if this happened before or after meeting my dad, and that would be an interesting thing to know. Um, I had this vivid dream, and I was gonna say growing up, but really my whole life, it's not too often that I remember my dreams in general, but it's like it's also not it's even less often that I have like really visceral, like I can feel that experience kind of dream. And this was one of them. I distinctly remember, um, well, and I was a pretty lonely kid. I mean, my family kind of was of the dynamic that, you know, everybody's kind of in their own world, and so, I was just left to do my own thing a lot of the time, and that was very lonely for me growing up, and so I remember the older I got, the lonelier it got, and so when I was around that same age, 7, 8, 9, something like that, I remember just being in bed and not being able to sleep and looking out the window at the stars and going, "I wanna go home. I really wanna go home. I don't really like it here. I wanna go home." And I was old enough and had the wherewithal enough to think to myself, "Well, wait a minute, hold on. That doesn't even make sense. This is the only home I've ever known. What do you mean I wanna go home?" And so I had that like, this is where the confusion and self-doubt inside my own mental thought process began, I think, as a child, because it was like, I have this feeling and I feel it and I know it deep inside me, but logically on the surface, it makes absolute nonsense. And so I kind of tie that in. And so I had this dream right after that, and the dream was like I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember seeing something outside and wanting to go check it out. And so I got up out of my bed, I walked to the back door, I walked outside, and I'm standing on the deck, and I look over to the left, up into the sky, and all I see is this big flash of green light, and that's all I remember. And I really didn't think anything of it at the time. I just thought, well, what a weird dream, whatever, and went on about my life until much later. And when you finally become conscious and aware of your surroundings and start trying to put pieces together and figure things out, um, that's when I really started diving into some of this stuff in the realm of the story and what's in the field and putting it together. And that's why I identify with some kind of, I don't want to call it alien abduction. I really don't, because I don't know if that's 100% fits. But there was definitely, let's call it a glitch. There was a glitch in the matrix, and I think I was programmed with a bunch of stuff to set me on my path to maybe reconnecting with my dad. Maybe it's generational keys that was kind of like this big story that is going to take 30, 40, 50, however many years to really work its way through the field, until it gets to, a full readiness of convergence. Um, but I think we're close. And there's been a lot that's come with that. Um, and I think there's still a fair amount of information I have yet to discover, because part of what's been helpful to me on this path of seeking and learning and knowing is that there are always different levels to truth, and there are attachments along the way. And so if we identify with something and then define it and attach to it, then are we limiting ourselves in that regard? Because if there is more to the story that we've attached to this one piece, then we may or may not be able to see the rest of whatever's going on over here. If we're, well, I belong to this race, or I'm this like whatever the little tidbit of information is, if we start to form thoughts and beliefs around um, these snippets of information, if you will, then we might be missing something else that's relevant and possibly important to the story. And so I've tried to kind of take that really high level overview of every information that crosses my path. Like, oh, this is an interesting piece of the story. I'm going to put it on the puzzle board and see what happens with that. And usually, I'm glad that I do that, because usually those pieces of information evolve over time, where my understanding at this level was this. And then as I gain more wisdom and knowledge and understanding of the whole paradigm and, other circumstances and how they all fit together, then the knowledge kind of grows with the story as it evolves, in my awareness. And so in my biological family lineage, I am carrying um, ancient Egypt, and and the perfected child in Horus, is the character there. I see other characters in the story as well, and there's a whole Egyptian pantheon, too, that I've been studying, and is I'm putting pieces together and starting to make sense of some of those things. And so we have Egyptian lineage. Um, my dad's mom's name is Faye, and she loved owls, and she always had like just really cutesy. It reminds me of fairy kind of. She has this very fairy-like personality, where she was always telling stories, and and she was a really cool lady, and so I see that as kind of another category of something I bring to the table. Um, as well as there's something planetary in the field. Venus. My have a great grandmother whose name was Venus, and they say what's in a name. Well, it could be anything, could be everything. So I have Venus, um, marigold. So something about flowers, and like the rose lineage is a little bit more of a distant story in terms of genetics, but it's still in my field in the soul family aspect. And then what do you know about, I forget the name of the movie, but there's a movie about, it's like a time traveling story where this character goes back in time to like resolve something and then ends up falling in love with themselves on a different timeline. And so
Hmm.
it's called the "I'm my own grandpa" paradox.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
definitely have, I think, some threads of that in the field because I see paradoxical stuff all over the place, and I'm like, where is that coming from? But I think there's a little bit of that going on. But when it comes to, okay, so let's back up to the collective story, right? Because the conversation is around ascension, and we're not here to do the individual ascension. We already did that. We're here to do the collective ascension. And so I think the some of the larger um snags, hangups in the story in the process are around big traumas. And I think on a higher level, they're collective traumas, but in order for us to really resonate with them in on a deeper level, so that we are passionate from our own inner will and our own level of benevolence in order to act on these things, we must also pick up personal like threads of those collective stories, so that when it comes time to all stand together, we are all kind of harmonious in that from a deeper level of personal power and will, because that's what's required to really get us to where we need to go. And so there's a lot of threads of addiction paradigms all over the board. There's abuse by way of either through addiction or through neglect. Um, there is threads of narcissism, pedophilia, inappropriate, adult children relations. Um, there's more in the list, but those are kind of some of the big ones. And so I feel like the story that I picked up is like there's little seeds, like the little seeds of trauma. That's what I got downloaded with, I think, when I had that experience as an 8-year-old and saw the green light in the sky. I had to download all those seeds of what I decided to come in here to carry, but I had to have a window of purity so that I could understand just what the world was and how it functions and how to kind of operate within that before I was then downloaded with an overwhelming amount of information that then unraveled and began to unfurl over the course of the rest of my life. And so it's like from that download point, and I almost have this theory that I almost called it in, because when I was 4, here's going back to some of the first memories. I remember not only picking up the phone and talking to an operator, I also remember talking to myself in the mirror and having like the depth of conversations I would have with myself in the mirror was a little bit unnerving. And it was also something that I had a hard time sharing with people without feeling like I was being judged for it. And so there was a little bit of layer of, hey, stuff that down. We don't talk about that kind of feeling going on. But then the other thing is I remember I think this only happened one time. I was not a draw on the wall kind of kid, but I remember distinctly picking up a Sharpie marker and drawing spirals, counterclockwise spirals on the
Hmm.
all over my bedroom walls. And
Yeah.
I have no idea why or what possessed me to do that, but it follows a bit of a number pattern where, you come in to the world, and then at 4 years old I did this thing, and then at 8 years old I had this experience, and then at 12 years old is really when the traumatic experiences started to, like, come into my field. And then so 4, 8, 12, I think 16, towards the end of 16, early 17 is when I started, like, drinking and partying and, like, calling it like, Matt calling in those threads of, the collective story, if you wanna call it that, and just kinda looking at it from the bigger picture like that, it's like, "Oh, well, yeah, I guess it all makes sense if you look at it that way." Um, what else? Did I miss anything? What questions do you have?
Well, if you look in the chat, I'm putting up a symbol. Does that resonate with you in any way? Before I tell you what it is.
So the spirals that I drew were like I started for whatever reason, I started at the top and came around this way, and the one that you have shared kind of starts at the bottom left corner and is almost a little bit triangular in nature. So they're
Yeah.
similar but slight differences.
Okay. That's one of the symbols of pedophilia. It's sort of like you'll see it. Um, I think if you look at the Pope's garments, it's like around his neck. He's got all these symbols around his neck, and I'm sure we could find that in the Mormon Church as well. But I was just thinking that your subconscious was talking about it, But then again, the other thing I'm thinking was that you're trying to trace out the Milky Way, and then maybe take a step back and figure out where is home. If you make that connection. Let's see what you took. Okay, last time you told me you took a road trip with your dad too. How far apart were your road trips with your mom and your dad?
Almost 30 years, 25 years.
Oh, okay. Wow. Uh, hmm. the well, you said you got a blue scarab, um,
Mhm.
and a piece of papyrus. And is there anything else from Egypt that you have, like crystals or anything like that? An unk?
Later in life, and as I'm doing my research and, seeking out this knowledge, I have gravitated towards certain things like the Ankh. In fact, I I have a friend that gave me this is like a special kind of glass that
Mm,
is like it's both green and blue depending on how the light shines on it. And
yes.
for whatever reason, I decided to name him Ankh. So this is like he's my Ankh.
Okay.
And what else? Some of the recent, like, programs, I don't know if I like that word in this context, but, like, let's call it healing journey. I've been participating in healing journeys that have had certain Egyptian characters, as an overlighting, support member, and so Isis has been, kinda loud in my field the last 6 months or so. Um, Horus, obviously, my grandfather's name is Horus, and here's another reason why I think that's, remarkable is because, like, there's a handful of like ways I define what a puzzle piece looks like. In terms of this kind of cosmic, putting of the stories together, maybe beyond many lifetimes, like as part of unraveling the mystery of the unknown, like there has to be unknown if we're connecting lifetimes, and we as a culture don't, that's not socially acceptable. Well, then, we're working the mystery into the story so that we can still validated at the end of the day, but not like have too much resistance in the process. And so one of those qualifiers is if someone rejects it. Like if you don't know where it came from, it's probably a puzzle piece. If you think it's random, it's probably a puzzle piece. If it's something that's true about you but you reject it, it's probably a puzzle piece because it's an opportunity for you to face that resistance within yourself and come back into yourself about it. And I don't think my grandpa ever faced the Horus in him and and reconciled his Horus parts, but his name at birth is Horace Smith. um, I think because of the tie with the LDS culture, but um he asked to be called Bud his whole life. Bud as in you're my buddy. Um, and I forgot to mention a couple of pieces of the trauma story because there's also a lot of death in the field by way of either substance abuse, suicide, um, what else? I guess grandpa's brother died of an accident. He was hit by a car. But my grandfather lost his older brother when he was, I forget exactly how old, but a teenager. And so there, and I don't know what his parents were like or how he kind of was brought up beyond that. I think his dad was actually really mean. And so I think he picked up some traits and characteristics in that. And then add the layer of, losing a brother and not knowing how to deal with grief. And really I feel like the bigger story is being able to deal with grief through trauma. It's not just about the trauma, but it's how grief manifests in so many different ways. It really is truly a whole spectrum, and being able to show compassion and kindness to one another in that process without, even sometimes without knowing what's going on, or really like it's cultivating that awareness around what grief is and how it shows up so that we can be better to each other is kind of rings true to me on a grander scale because it is so prominent throughout everybody's story in my field.
Yeah. Well, if you have those close ties to the LDS Church, then you certainly have ties into um, Freemasonry, and then also the Egyptian tradition from that angle as well. So, I mean, this is very consistent. What we talked about last time, that it may very well have been that you passed through a Stargate right into Egypt and was part of that royal family, and now it's sort of like, you may be your own grandpa in a way. I said it that way on purpose, but eh,
Well, and I it makes perfect sense to me because if you look at that pantheon, the Egyptian pantheon I was talking about, Horus, the character in the story that it portrays is like, it's like there's I think five souls that's part of this clan, if you want to call it that. The entire pantheon is a bit bigger because there's layers beyond that in terms of the creation story. But the human element, I think there's five souls, and four of them incarnated at one time, and Horus did not. Horus stayed a soul for the time being and that temporarily, and then came back in later as like Horace Jr. is what I call it.
Hmm.
And so whether you wanna say that that's I'm my own grandpa or I am just a different version of myself circling back around in the story to kinda bridge the gaps of whatever went wrong the first time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, it's my theory of exiting Earth that as we came in, we got to go right back out the way we came in. So um, that's not to say that you're going to move to Egypt anytime soon, um, but it's like there are parts of the United States that are anchors, I would say. And so you have in America, you have Egypt's, you have Memphis, you have Cairo's and stuff like that. And I know that out west, and probably there in Utah, you have similar. You have some some kind of representation of ancient Egypt, and and so in fact, I think that was in yeah, I think that was in the channeling with the sun, where you don't literally have to be at that location, but just to have a representation of it, and you can affect the karma of it that way, which is kind of good to know. And you're bringing light to that particular story. Um, a slight parallel would be the story of Edgar Casey. If I remember this correctly, I mean, I know he was a character named Rata. That was his oversoul, and his soul group was about 4 or 5 people in particular. And in that case, well, his wife in that lifetime, I think he cheated on her. And so then when they came into the next lifetime, she's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna sit this one out. He cheated on me." It's just interesting how you can hold on to things, even in the afterlife.
That to
Speaking
me
of
sounds
which,
more like a period of healing. Like,
yeah,
I'm not ready to go back to that yet. You have fun for a little bit, and I'll catch you on the next round.
yeah. Well, interestingly, right before I came on here, I got an email from my friend Joanne, and she was working on a book and then got really sick. I told you about this in class. That then I was trying to do some healing on her. Well, she's back to good again, and going to do the book. And she's written a book about Edgar Casey, and not him specifically, but it was like another person that was associated. I'm just realizing you're going to post this eventually, so I'm going to watch my words. Not give any spoilers away, but um, yeah. So I'll be doing yeah, just to preface it, why not? I'll be helping her out with this book, and it's on soulmates or cellmates. It's about soul groups, and yeah, is it a good relationship or a bad relationship? And it's going to be a little bit of a challenge because I selected my sibling, which I don't talk to them anymore, so I don't know how that's going to play out. But she said that I'm the only male that volunteered for this study, and I said, well, I'll do whatever she needs done, especially now that my skills are far more expanded than they were the last time I did this. But I may go back to ancient Egypt yet. I haven't found one. I haven't found a single lifetime yet. I found one in Atlantis, but not Egypt.
Interesting. That sounds like a really fascinating, fun project. Let me know if y'all need an androgynous at the table.
Yeah,
um, but soulmates or cellmates made me think of the like cellular matrix, like as in entangled.
yeah,
So I think that could be a whole nother layer to the story, which is fascinating.
yeah.
Um, and circling back to the Egyptian lines, I don't know how far back that goes with me. Maybe and I don't fully. know the history on this, but I've gotten kind of little pings and downloads along the way about at some point, like there was a line of purity in those Egyptian cultures before at some point it got distorted. And so I've heard the pure the pharaohs, the the purity in the pharaoh line some is called Kemet, and then the ancient Egyptian information that we know today is comes from the distorted version. And so I think that would be a really fascinating story to channel into as well about what happened there.
Hmm. Um, you want to channel anything in particular? I consider trying Rata,
Ratan,
Rata,
Rata,
High Priest
Ratatata.
of Egypt.
Okay, so there's a story about I've heard him called uh Thoth or Toth, Thoth, or
Yes,
Jehuti is another name for him.
right.
There's something there's a tale, if you will, I don't know what to call this, a story about some kind of interaction between Jehuti or Toth and Ra, and how it almost reminded me of like some kind of strategic like meeting of the minds, like not quite chess, but like today's version of chess, where they like got into this um I don't even know what to call it. But this would be a fun story to channel into about what was the situation around this little game, if you want to call it that, between Ra and Jehuti, where it kind of feels like I got the impression that it was like the story of life. And so maybe it ties in with the distortion of uh negative influence going like making a deal in a way. It's like I don't know if I'd call it the original deal with the devil, maybe it wasn't, but it follows that if once upon a time there was the sun and like the planetary creatures and well how did humanity come along, and this character comes along and has this battle of the minds with the sun god Ra, and all of a sudden like and he outsmarts Ra and is able to gain like 5 days or something like that. I don't know the full story. um but it's been one of those kind of on the back of my mind curious about this story kind of things.
Hmm.
Does that sound familiar at all?
No, that's a new one on me.